You've probably never heard of America's most prolific serial killer. Or at least I hadn't, and I considered myself knowledgeable on the topic. When I first started researching, I was so shocked that I had never heard of this man or seen any media coverage about him or any of the cases. This is especially true because 2 of his unidentified victims were found in my area. His name was Samuel Little, and he sometimes went by Samuel McDowell. He was active for over 4 decades and across 19 states. He was not brought to justice until fairly recently in 2012. However, the full extent of his crimes were unknown until 2018 when he confessed to 93 murders. The FBI considers all of the confessions credible, and over 60 of them have been confirmed by various authorities. It was becoming evident that Samuel Little would pass away soon as his memory and health deteriorated. Because of this, the FBI recorded 700 hours of confessions, and they also had him draw portraits of each of his unidentified victims. The FBI actually released these to the public. I will link that below in case anybody knows anything and can send information in. Samuel Little was given the nickname the choke and stroke killer. I don't really agree with giving serial killers nicknames, and I especially don't agree with this nickname because I feel like it's kind of crass. But it does tell you what you need to know about his signature behavior and his killings. He strangled all his victims and sexually assaulted them in many cases. So all this begs the question, how can one man kill 93 women and go undetected? First, we have to look into his upbringing, which there is not much information on. But he was born on June 7th, 1940, in a small town of Reynolds, Georgia. He had 2 teenage parents, and he said his mother was a lady of the night who abandoned him in infanthood, but this could not be confirmed. He lived with his paternal grandmother through childhood. He developed his strangulation fetish early. He told investigators that his first erection was when he watched his kindergarten teacher touch her neck. He also told police that he was 7 or 8 when he first fantasized about choking somebody to death. He often thought about killing his classmates. When he was a teenager, he found a photo in a true crime magazine of a strangulation victim, and he hung it up on his wall. It was in adolescence when he began his transient and criminal lifestyle. He considered himself a professional shoplifter. He didn't have any jobs as he traveled the country, so this was how he made his income. He was arrested hundreds of times and had a rap sheet over 100 pages long. Throughout his lifetime, he was arrested for shoplifting, theft, DUI, drug charges, fraud, breaking and entering, armed robbery, grand larceny, sodomy, assault, rape, aggravated assault on a police officer, resisting arrest, and solicitation of a prostitute. In September of 1976, Samuel Little was arrested after he beat, choked, and raped a woman in his car outside of St. Louis. He was convicted of assault with intent to ravage rape, but he only got 3 months in county jail. In Pascagoula, Mississippi, in 1982, Samuel Little was arrested for shoplifting. While he was being held on those charges, he was charged for the murder of Melinda Lapre. Witnesses had last seen Lapre getting into Little's car, and he had also previously attacked 2 sex workers in Pascagoula. All these witnesses testified, but a grand jury didn't even indict him because they didn't trust the credibility of the witnesses because they were sex workers. After a grand jury failed to indict him for the murder of Melinda Lapre, he was extradited to Gainesville, Florida. He faced charges for the 1982 murder of Patricia Ann Mount, who had last been seen getting into his car before her beaten and naked body was found in a field. Despite all the evidence, he was acquitted and released. In 1984 in San Diego, Little was again arrested for assaulting 2 women. One had escaped after he brutalized, raped, and attempted to murder her, and the other one, the police had actually caught him in the act as he was attempting to murder this woman. He was charged with 2 counts of attempted murder, but he took a plea deal for assault and false imprisonment. He served 2.5 years and was released. All these instances are really frustrating because had he been held or looked into a little bit more thoroughly for each one of these cases, or even convicted of the murders, how many women's lives could have been saved? And surprisingly, his longest prison sentence was 3 years, and it was after he broke into a furniture store in Mansfield in 1961. So now we know about Little, but how did he get away with it for so long? Well, it was partly due to his transient lifestyle, his choice of victims, and the lack of physical evidence left behind. So, Samuel Little intentionally targeted women on the outskirts of society. He said that he avoided those he thought would be missed. In an interview with an investigator in Ohio, Little said, "I'm not going to go over there into the white neighborhood and pick out a little teenage girl." Because of this strategy, the majority of his victims were sex workers, vagrants, drug users, mentally handicapped, or runaways. His victims were predominantly Black women, with about 68 of them being so. He murdered a handful of white women, at least 3 Hispanic women, and 1 Native American woman. He also killed 1 transgender woman. Unfortunately, his strategy paid off. The deaths of these women were mainly unnoticed by these communities, and little public pressure was put on authorities to solve the cases. Mary Brosley was his first victim. It was New Year's Eve in 1970 when she met Little in a bar in Miami, Florida. She was 33 years old, anorexic, and alcoholic. She had run away from domestic abuse, leaving 2 children behind. Her body had already decomposed for 3 weeks before being discovered. This, obviously, was a major disadvantage for physical evidence being found. Her alcohol content was high, between 0.26 and 0.37. So the police thought it was possible that she could have just dropped dead from alcohol poisoning. And although she was buried in a shallow grave, the police did not recognize this as a homicide. Her death was not ruled a murder until 1982, 12 years after her death. And she wasn't even identified until her remains were put in a database by a specialist over 35 years later. This is a trend with many victims not being recognized as homicide victims, because of the lifestyles they led, or just because they were not necessarily the top priority. A lot of them were ruled overdoses or accidents. Martha Cunningham was a 34-year-old Black woman who was walking to a church service in 1974 in Knoxville, Tennessee. Her body was littered with bruises, her belongings were stolen, her dress was pulled up, and her stockings and underwear were pulled down. Despite the evidence, investigators found no obvious signs of death, and they ruled it due to natural causes because she had a history of seizures. In 1977, the murder of Mary Ann Jenkins, a 22-year-old Black woman, is another example of a mistaken accident. She was found nude, but Illinois police still ruled this as a lightning strike. In 1994, the body of Jolanda Jones, a 26-year-old Black mother of 2, was found in an abandoned house with a crack pipe under her thigh. Because she had cocaine in her system, it was ruled an overdose. Investigators believe that his last victim was Nancy C. Stevens, who was left strangled on the side of the road in Tupelo, Mississippi in 2005. In 2012, the LA police had used DNA that Little had given in one of his many prison stints, and they used that to connect him to multiple murders. They were able to connect him to the 1989 murders of Audrey Nelson, Guadalupe Apacata, and later the 1987 murder of Carol Alford. Officials tracked his Social Security payments to a homeless shelter in Louisville, Kentucky. The U.S. Marshal Fugitive Task Force apprehended him and were able to extradite him to California from an outstanding narcotics charge. Samuel Little was convicted for these murders, and despite the DNA evidence and the conviction, he maintained his innocence for a while. It was up until 2018 when he developed a relationship with Texas Ranger James Holland that he finally confessed to the magnitude of his crimes. This launched a nationwide opening of cold cases, solving of cold cases, and identifications of victims. A lot are not identified still, but each year more and more are. Officials recognize that without his confessions, many of these cases would not have been solved. This is around the time that they taped the confessions and had him paint the victims. The confession tapes and the portraits are truly chilling. Firstly, in the tapes, he recalls the instances in which he killed women as he would just recalling pastimes of his youth. He's completely unfazed by the violence he inflicted and unremorseful for his victims. He even becomes noticeably gleeful in the confession tapes when he talks about the actual strangulation. The portraits are just as chilling. He depicts them with scary accuracy. Sometimes they even have fear in their eyes, you can tell. The case of Samuel Little and his many victims showcase a problem in the criminal justice system. It is getting better with databases, information sharing, cold case investigative work, and forensic technology. But the fact of the matter is, he still did get away with this for way too long. He wasn't completely undetected. He had trials in which he was charged with murder. He just got away with it. His killings also illustrate a problem that still happens today, and that is the phenomenon of the less dead. The less dead is where vulnerable and oppressed populations become victims of violent crimes. They're not really given the public attention and care that other people may get. Hopefully, with serial killers like Samuel Little that target the less dead coming to light, society and the criminal justice system as a whole can take a look inside itself as to why this occurs and hopefully solve this problem. Samuel Little died of natural causes in prison on December 30th of 2020. And with his death died information that he may have forgotten or suppressed for some reason. This case just makes me so sad for the almost 100 women who were killed by Little because he thought that they were not worthy of life and would not be missed. Many of these women probably just fell on hard times and had many family members that will miss them. Samuel Little took away many daughters, mothers, sisters, and friends. And for that, I say good riddance. Stop! Okay, my dog won't move, so we'll try it this way. Gotta dodge the kisses every time I press play.